So I was thinking, since you spent like half a semester listening to me talk, it's kind of boring. Routine, listening to me, sitting back in your comfy chairs, thinking when is this gonna end? So I was thinking we're gonna do something different this time, and it will require a bit more of activity from you, but it's for the greater good. We're gonna try and help the world by doing something called a giving game. How many of you have participated in a giving game before? None of you? This is new to all of you? That's terrific. So there is a group from Effective Altruism Hong Kong. Many of them are students here at HKU that does this in various courses here at HKU. So I thought maybe some of you have already taken this, so it's great that you didn't. But even if you did, we're doing a bit of a twist to it, and we're focusing on something else. So what is this giving game, and how do we play this game? This is Look. Anybody familiar with Look? So some of you in your weekly readings chose to listen to the 80,000 hours podcast, or see some of the videos by 80,000, or giving what we can. So he's the executive director for Giving What We Can. Great guy, amazing communicator, does some terrific interviews, really good at communicating. And then Giving What We Can has a whole branch dedicated to how to promote effectiveness. This is our correspondence by email. So it turns out that you can go to Giving What You Can and ask for a sponsorship. Giving What We Can, with Look, confirmed, and this is the email, that each one of you gets $10. And you can choose where to donate these $10. That is not a game, that is for real. Whatever it is that you decide here in this course, whichever charity we'll pick together, Look has committed to Giving What We Can, putting $10 based on your choice. And he will give us a certificate, and he will show us that this is what they've done. So we're talking about real money. So somebody Giving What We Can, this is part, they're a charity, so they have funding coming from the other side, but they really care about educating and helping people. And of course, whatever decision we make, it will go to one of the charities over there. And all of these charities are effective charities. Now we just need to choose which one of those is the most effective of those. So it's interesting how this whole thing works. Actually, if you have a student group, a society, you're part of whatever organization, some people even do this in their church or in their temple, you can run this yourself. You can ask them for sponsorship and tell them what the setup is. And if you follow certain rules, like choosing one of the effective charities that's on their list, then they will sponsor you. So I think it's amazing. A good opportunity for us to play some games, think about all sorts of things, but also contribute to some good. So there's actual money behind this. So somebody is sponsoring us to sponsor the charities. So usually when they run this at HKU and in other places, they give these 3 charities to choose from. Have you heard of these charities before? Give Directly, Play Pumps, and Against Malaria Foundation. What did you hear about any of these? Who heard about one of those? Yeah, what did you hear? Which one? Against Malaria, yeah? Yeah, do you remember anything about it? Yeah. Right. Terrific. Yeah. So this is usually used as the benchmark for one of the most effective charities out there. Because malaria nets about $2, and then they last for a family for about 3 years. And this is one of the most effective ways, at least according to their calculations, to protect families, little kids from malaria. So Against Malaria Foundation is used as a very high benchmark of the most effective charities. How about Give Directly? What do we know about them? Yes? Yes, give directly money to people in developing economies, people who are poverty, people who need money. Why would they include this in these three? What's special about give directly? What happens when we give people cash? Is this an effective way to? No, why? Why not? You're doing this. What do you know? What do we know about give directly? Okay, so there's no other incentives other than monetary incentive to get like the money. And then you're saying it's less effective than say what?
I remember like education for the girls.
Education. What's good about giving directly? What are we saving by giving a person directly? So they have mobiles, maybe like very simple mobiles with SMS or something like that. Almost everybody has mobiles nowadays. In Africa, maybe not smartphones, but at least mobile. And they get the cash transfers directly to their mobiles, and they can actually purchase things with that. What was Give Directly trying to solve by doing this directly? Overhead, there are no middlemen. So directly to the person, you don't have to go through others. Nobody's putting something in their pocket. People get almost the entire amount. And then one of the claims is that people know the best what it is that they need. Not us, we live here in Hong Kong, we're very privileged. We think, okay, maybe they need, I don't know, toilets. Maybe they need better health, education. Maybe we don't know because we're here and they're there. Why should we tell them what we think that they need? So Give Directly says, give them the cash and they'll figure it out. And turns out, and economists have done randomized controlled trials on this, that this seems to help a lot. Sometimes it helps a lot more than other charities coming in and thinking they're going to solve all sorts of things, just like in the case of play pumps. So Give Directly is a much better charity than play pumps. Have you heard of play pumps? Okay. So Give Directly sends cash unconditionally. So you can see this is not a smartphone, but they get this cash and they can actually do something with it. Against Malaria Foundation is considered to be one of the top charities. And then there's Play Pump, which is the Giving Game calls this a decoy charity because it was so underperforming. It was such a waste of money. Although for most of the people, when you run the Giving Game, a lot of the people intuitively want to contribute to this. Why? Innovative way to provide drinking water in impoverished rural communities by using the energy created by children playing to operate a water pump. So as you can see over here, there's something that looks like a general playground. And every time they move around, water comes up from the ground. So they dig something very deep into getting the aquifer, the water underneath, and that gets the water. Now, what is the potential problem here? Like, why wouldn't this work? This looks like a lot of fun, right? So you give them something interesting as a community, plus you get water to places that don't have a lot of water. What could go wrong? Not consistent? Yeah, first of all, they can get tired of this. Second of all, not every weather is suitable for this, and you need water all time, all year, 24/7, right? So there's all sorts of things that can go wrong with the human motivation for this. If we want to measure the effectiveness of this sort of thing, what should we do? Generally, also, like in terms of the priorities of what these children need and what those communities need, this represents something that we perhaps in Hong Kong would care about. Like we need more parks and children playing, but these rural areas have a lot of things on their mind that goes beyond that, and perhaps this is not top priority. So if you compare play pumps to Against Malaria to Give Directly, this is considered one of the top. This is considered to be the benchmark. So whenever you compare to other charities, Give Directly is one. So everything is compared to give directly. Because the give directly, people know what it is that they need to invest this. They can decide if they want to invest this in playgrounds. They decide if they want to invest this in pumps, or they decide if they want to invest this in malaria nets. Every time you implement another charity, another policy, another solution, you compare this to giving people directly cash. So this is effective. And every time you want to do something else, you need to prove that you're more effective than giving people cash. So these three are very, very important. And there's a reason why giving game is usually targeted at that. The top, or one of the top charities, the benchmark, which is give directly, and then something that we thought in the West, it's going to work, everything is going to be great. But then we realized complete disaster, and that is the decoy play pump international. So now this is considered to be a case study of how not to do charity. Now, if we think about this, when we ask people to donate, many times, our heart, when we see this kind of thing, kids playing around, there's a playground, water, sounds very, very important. So intuitively, this is where we would like to go. So this is the original setup of the giving game. But because you listened to some podcasts, you heard about some charities, and I was worried that maybe you've heard about Give Directly or Against Malaria Foundation, and maybe even Play Pump. I wanted us to try something different. So we'll focus on these three. Have you heard of the Helen Keller International, the Center of Long-Term Risk? And what is that? Clean Air Task Force. Heard of any of these? Yeah, what did you hear about this? Yes, terrific. Do you know anything about its effectiveness? Okay, terrific. To be determined, yeah? How about the other ones? So we have Helen Keller International, what they focus on. So now we're talking about the three charities that we need to choose from. So we're gonna put our $10 each to one of these three. And you need to help me, this class, make a decision on that. So Helen Keller International, the cause that they're working on is vitamin A deficiency, can cause all sorts of problems with even severity of infections leading to death. So I need to consider just how crucial this might be. And giving them vitamin A supplements in sub-Saharan Africa, which reduces their malnutrition and averts blindness. So this is a big cause for people losing their eyesight. Okay, that's Helen Keller International. All sorts of information. Clean Air Task Force, which this group is working on. What do? They identify the best pathways to zero carbon energy systems. Also work with legislation in the US, and then do all sorts of outreach and education, hosting things, technical seminars, workshops. So you can already see there's more complexity here. So this one has vitamin A supplements. So you can think about all the mechanism behind this, how to get there, how to give vitamin A. Is vitamin A really solving an issue, not solving an issue? Think about all the considerations over here. This one is already talking about legislation, talking about things like climate change, which is a wider problem, perhaps more difficult to think about. And then the last one, Center of Long-Term Risks. Anybody doing long-termism? Yeah? Have you heard of this group, the fund? Addressing the worst case risk from the development and deployment of advanced AI. Focus on reduction of extreme suffering. Producing academic research, making and recommending grants, building a community of professionals and other researchers through events, fellowships, and individual support. So I think in the task that you're supposed to work on for this week, many of you faced a very difficult challenge of, we've got three charities from different domains. How to even begin comparing these three? In the first one, it's relatively more straightforward. So we got Give directly, and we've got play pumps. Okay, we can compare these two. And then Malaria, it's like in the same district, perhaps even the same target population, same concerns. So we can try and do all sorts of things, qualities, we can look at the quality of life, how many years left, do all sorts of calculations, perhaps put some health. But these three seem very different from one another, right? So a lot of challenges here. So I'll ask you to, as a preliminary vote, to tell me what your gut intuition tells you about this, which one we should donate to. So I'll need all your votes because this goes as a gut instinct intuition of this group to give what we can, to look, to tell what is it that we initially thought that we should invest in. And then we'll do a final vote after we play the game. So take a minute, think about this. Which one of these three charities, the Helen Keller International, Clean Air Task Force, Center on Long-Term Risk, who would you give your $10 to? Yeah, all good? Done? Voted? Anybody still working on this? So we've got 11. So I need 2 more. If you don't participate in this, somebody is not going to get $10 from you. Yes, please add. So we do want to spread that money. Yeah? All right. So this is the setup. We're going to split into groups. Let's do 2 groups. So the setup is like this. I want you to debate this. So you were working with your own group on a Google Doc or whatever in your task, in your specific domain, in a specific task. But here I would urge you to try and mix between the groups. Don't just stick with your own group, but go and meet some other people in the classroom. It's a chance for you to get to know others that you haven't talked to yet. This is the setup. There's going to be 2 people in each group, the 2 groups that we have, that are going to have a different function. We're going to have one person who is an observer. This is an outsider. This person is not going to be part of the group. The function of this person, of the observer, is just to observe, to document everything that goes on in the group. So I don't want anybody in the group to use a mobile or a laptop. I know that you perhaps want to think about what information do I need? Let's Google this up. Let's see Wikipedia. Let's see if there's... Don't do any of that. I want this to be a purely intellectual kind of exercise for us to think about the factors, assess this together, and come into a conclusion. So the observer takes away all the need for you to document. The observer documents everything that goes on in the group as much as possible. So this observer needs a laptop open, pointing to this URL, giving game report, and documenting what goes on in the team. Then we have a monitor. And the monitor has a very specific function. The function is to alert for potential psychological biases. Some of them we discussed already. And then raise questions. So not answer questions, not be part of the discussion, not do anything. Just look at the discussion. And whenever there's a possible bias, say what the bias is or write this down, preferably both. But I want everything to be documented about potential biases. Is that somebody is saying something, which is completely okay. We just want to have some kind of a reflection about what could be a potential bias in the way that we just analyze this as a group. And then perhaps as a group, we can overcome this. And this person can also raise questions, but only raise questions, not give any kinds of answers. So all the biases in the questions must be written down, and also help the group with monitoring the time, which I did not finish the slide for, which is very strange. Okay, so 30 minutes, about 5 minutes for each one of these. So if you see that the group is stuck on one of the stages, the monitor will say, hey, it's time to move on to the next stage. Okay, so This monitor, the only thing is that monitor the discussion, see if any potential biases, and then ask a question. Okay? And then the other members, which I think here in this case would be about 4 members. First goal, discuss how to approach this problem. I think by now you have a little bit of experience from the chapters that you wrote and the task that you did as a group. Identify some lead factors on how to guide your decision. Identify information that you need and probably don't have. So what would you need in order to make this kind of decision if you had information? Assess the charities on each of the factors that you identified, given the information that you don't have, whatever it is that you think, and make sure that this is a group discussion. At the end, what I'll want is 1, 2, depending on you, people to come and kind of present the group discussion. Could be the monitor observer, but you can decide as a group if you want somebody who actually took part in this. So I'll let you decide what that is. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, over there. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and 2. Now, the first thing that you need to do is identify who in your group, and it's completely okay. I know some people prefer to be like more in the back, completely fine. Identify your observer and your monitor, and open that link over there for the giving game report. I'll just show you what that looks like. Get together, the 2 teams get together, sit together where you're facing. So team 1 and team 2. I think let's do team 1 on this side, just like move to this side, and then team 2 to that side. Yeah, so team 1 will be team A in the report. Great. If you still don't know each other, this is a good time to kind of like, hi, my name is, that kind of thing. I'll give you like 1 minute to do all the introductions. Yeah. Yeah, so first decide on who is the observer and who is the monitor. Yeah, so our main goal is to choose one of the 3 charities, how to assess, how to compare, and then come with a conclusion as a team, who you're going to recommend out of the 3. Okay, so choose an observer and a monitor. Any questions? Everything is okay? Okay, so your first task is to define the goal, how to even approach this problem. You've got the 3 charities, how to address this, where to begin, what to do. Think about this together. Who is your observer? Who is your monitor? So you 4 are discussing this amongst yourself in order to make a decision. Who is your observer? Observer over here. So document everything. Who is the monitor?
Do that. Yes.
Monitor, okay. So the 4 of you kind of discuss how to approach this, how to best deal with this. Good. So these 3, the Helen Keller International, the Center of Long-Term Risk, and the Clean Air Task Force. Okay, so I think we'll continue. I hope you found this to be an interesting exercise, if only having the chance to like talk to your classmates instead of just listening to me. And I think it helps to see the thought process of how other people are processing this. Perhaps people that you don't know rather than the people you chose to team up with. And especially with these kinds of charities, this is difficult stuff. Like, it's very difficult to kind of map out all the factors. Even how to approach this question seems like a tricky business. So I was really curious to like sit behind and see how you do this. I don't get to kind of listen in to your stuff. I only see the output. So it really helps me to understand your thought process and then compare this to my thought process the first time that I did this. And I deal with this all the time. I try to map the cognitive biases to see how I'm affected. I just want to share with you before we go into this that when I got so a lot of the slides over here I actually took from Giving What We Can. They said, these are the recommended slides, please use that. And I had to change the slides a little bit. Why? I'll just give you an example. So I'll open this. And I'll show you some of the hidden slides. So Helen Keller came with this at the beginning. So they're saying, show this to people. And I changed the image into this one. So instead of showing this one, I showed this one. Why not show this one? It has an impact. Immediately when I saw this, oh God, I really want to help this girl, you know, I really want to make sure that she's okay. And I didn't want you to be influenced by this. And sometimes when we try and envision this, it's much easier for us to envision the Helen Keller blindness. Climate change, you know, if we look at the news, Pakistan a little bit, where all sorts of things affected. But even then, difficult to see like individual cases. But this is very impactful. So even with the slides that give in what we can, which is an effective altruism direction, I think they're also not completely aware to some of the biases. There's another one over here showing you how this works, the Helen Keller. So I think it's very important for us to be aware of these biases. Plus, for some of the charities like Helen Keller, they had three slides, and for things like Clean Air Task Force, they had one slide. Then I also realized this has a lot to do with the information that's available. So actually, some of these charities have a lot of information. You know, they've been at it for a very long time. They've been on the GiveWell list for a very long time. Some of them are relatively new, especially the long-termism stuff is relatively recent. They're still trying to figure stuff out. It's still like more of the broad level things, but they're making progress very, very fast because they're part of this movement and because of these kinds of attempts to quantify things and compare between those. So what I was thinking we'll do now, is go back to our questions and then ask our observers to summarize this, like 2-3 minutes for each team. And I want to, are you with me? So we'll start from this team, and I want you to listen to their thought process. And after you hear their summary, I want you to try and share with me and this team, what are your reflections of what you've heard, okay? So listen very carefully. Here, try and summarize, yeah.
Like our team have summarized a few, I would say, their criteria to evaluate. Like the first one is being cost effectiveness, and how is the solutions offered by different charities is helping their audience. Like in the first charity, like we think it is rather cost effective because it offers a direct a preventive measure to blindness instead of and to prevent any future cost of medication in order to cure the blindness itself. And also the second consideration, or maybe I would say is a trade-off, is like the short-term vs long-term things. Like in the first charities, it tackles the immediate needs for people who may be blind, but also but for the remaining two, they are more like long-term, like is there any probability of a killing AI emerge, or like will we all boiled in the future, like if climate change goes wild. So one of our member mentions that in long run is very hard to estimate the real effects of those threats. So our group so that this may be one of the reasons why we choose the first charity instead of the others two. And also the last one is like the individual versus the general public things. In the first charity, it also boils down to like for the first charity, they focus on specific targets. Like we really know who they're helping and why they're helping them. And for the second and third charities, they're like helping the humankind, or the mankind, whether you like, they're very broad, and we find it very hard to first comprehend the issues, and second to evaluate the effectiveness of the measure they've taken. And also and we also find some of our biases during our discussions, like mentioned by others, like the availability bias, because we don't have enough data or information. And also we don't, and whether it's not we don't have the data or they are not transparent enough, the availability bias kicks in and we start to, to tend to donate to the charity that we research for. Like in the initial phase of the discussions, we tend to talk more about donating to climate change for the climate change guys and also for the AI for the AI guys. So, but eventually we do come up with some criteria that help us to make the decision. And also the amount of money we are donating matters. Like $10 for some of us is not things that it will not make a significant difference for a big topic like AI threats or climate change. So it will be very practical and specific to help the people who may go blind. And is there any?
That was a great summary. Thank you. Very clear. May I ask, yes, well deserved. May I ask just for clarification, was it unanimous? You all agreed that you wanted Helen Keller? Yeah? Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. Any reflections on questions you want to ask or some things you want to compare to your group? Make sense? Was it convincing to you? Very similar? Yeah? All right, so let's hear from you and then we can maybe do a comparison.
Yeah, so it was, as Amos said, it's very similar. Like we initially considered the immediacy versus long-term like impact of the charities. I was going to swear by accident. So it was like urgency, immediacy, and long-term impact. How do we weigh them? And then there were another area that was of concern was like the scale of impact. So we narrowed it down to urgency, scale of impact, and transparency. I guess transparency was the only difference between your group, in that we were concerned about how the funds would be allocated. So it does go into like cost effectiveness and like the concern that there's a limited amount of funds, might not have a significant impact. So we were pretty much just they were pretty much just debating over those questions and trying to like figure out which one to like what to weigh and stuff. They ruled out long-termism pretty early on because of like it's not immediate and the accessibility, especially with stuff like AI and all that. Not everyone might have access to that. And then which also goes back to the availability bias because we don't have information about it, especially because the Helen Keller International one, we can kind of envision what happens. So well, we ruled out the long-termism one really quickly. So we were thinking of Helen Keller and Clean Air Task Force, and like how it's pretty much the same thing. And then we just considered like another area was just like the quality, because a member brought up the quality, like the quality added or something, life year.
Can you tell us what the end result was?
Yeah, so the end result, we agreed with them. We picked Helen Keller because it's more urgent and all that. Yeah.
What was it also unanimous? You
It
agreed on this?
was not unanimous, I think. Like it was 3-1, 3-2, something like that. Yeah.
3-1, 3-2?
Yeah.
The other one being the Clean Air.
Clean Air Task Force, because we didn't care about
it sounded for a while like you were debating this a lot longer and not being really sure.
because we went around in circles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you used similar factors,
Yes.
where their assessment of the factors led them to a very strong, seems like, conclusion that they go one direction. You were still like debating between the two.
Yeah, because
What were the factors that were leading you in a different direction?
in a different direction.
Why was Clean Air such a diversion or such a good option that kind of got you debating on this? If the factors are the same.
Because Helen Keller International is very like direct, right? It's very specific. But then the concern for Clean Air Task Force was that clean air contributes to other issues as well, like climate change and all that. So like the impact might actually be greater than the Helen Keller International one.
Okay.
And also I think one of the reasons why we there's like one of the differences between our group's decision making and theirs was also we only considered one viewpoint in terms of like how to donate, because they also thought about like what the general public might be thinking.
Yeah.
We only thought of like in terms of as a donating organization. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great summary. Anything to add to this? No? Did a good job? Yeah. Great. Well done. So sounds like you've covered a lot of ground. And it's interesting that you came to similar conclusions. I know that the path was not the same, but after you leave here, you can think about this more and see if you're updating your assessment. Are you updating your factors based on your weekly readings or the tasks that you have? I think it's really good to know what is it that we don't know. So I think almost every time that I deal with these things, I realize how ignorant I am about the world, how much more I need to know. And I don't know how you feel about the weekly readings, but when I read the stuff in the weekly readings or listen to the podcast or see the TED Talks, I'm just blown away by the level of complexity and the intelligence of the people who are confronting these issues, with the real willingness to tackle the unknown, quantify this, and try to make decisions in things that we usually try to ignore, while recognizing our biases, mapping out the biases and trying to address this one by one. How do you feel about this task? How do you feel about the process? Yeah.
I think if I can go, then
Yeah.
I'll get distracted.
Right.
I want to sit down and think about what are the things that I think is important and
Mhm.
what are the stuff that I need to look up and then just do like that.
Yes.
And I feel like, you know,
Yes. Good. I don't know if you remember, but last week we talked about all sorts of people, great people. Daniel Kahneman, for example, Dorothy Bishop, people who study biases, who recognize that they are themselves biased, right? And sometimes we fall into the traps that we warn against. We told the world, be careful of small, underpowered samples, and then we end up falling into this trap. So sometimes, and I try to simulate this in your groups, sometimes I force myself to be part of a group where there's somebody who never talks and just writes everything. And there's one person whose entire existence is about asking questions and telling me when I'm biased. And this is very, very important. It could be somebody in your life that helps you do this. It could be like a good friend, could be a colleague that helps you do that. But whatever collaboration I have, I really don't want to fall into these traps. So I try to have two people that will document everything regardless not being part of the team, but just like so I can see what's happening in the group. And then somebody who reminds me, puts me back into focus to remind me when it seems like I'm going astray and perhaps getting out of things. So how to keep myself focused, how not to get distracted by things, how not to get overwhelmed by all the information. Now I have this task. First, identify factors, then assess, then compare. So each one of those helps me to make progress in my research projects, in my decisions in life. Not that I'm, the greatest example, but at least it helps me simplify very complex stuff and reach some decisions that for the most part usually turn out okay. Good. So I'm glad we had this discussion. So we have about 20 minutes or so. We'll discuss a little bit about the psychology of altruism. And hopefully this will help you like ask some questions or tell me what you think about all sorts of topics. Some of these things I took from EA, Giving What We Can. They actually ask us to have a discussion and for me to give this information. And some of those I added from the psychology literature. Whenever they gave me something, and this is very important, just like you saw, they gave me slides. Do not just put the slides as is. When you have information, you Googled something and you saw a report, don't just put this in your report. Reflect on this. Think, is there something here that I need to change? Is this credible? Where is this information from? I want to go check. So I'll show you how I did this sort of thing. So a lot of charities, people have a lot of choice in this, and it's very difficult to choose which way to go. And one of the main issues is that we have limited amounts of money, $10 in this case for each of you, and we need to make a final decision. and we're sweating this this out. So if we go for charity A, it sometimes feel like we can't go to charity B. I think the team over here debated for a while. Maybe we split this like 50-50 or something like that, or do some of this and some of that. You can diversify, but this makes the decision even more complex, because instead of like this or this, now you start talking about like what are the ratios. So very difficult task for one individual to do well. All sorts of things that didn't go well with the play pumps. We're not going to go into this. Some statistics, and for each one of these statistics, before showing this to you, I actually went and tried to see what this Hope Consulting from 2010, what did they do, just to make sure that the stats are reasonable. So only a third of the people ever do any kind of research before they give to charity. So when we go to the bank and we invest our, into our future in a fund, we do generally a lot more research on that, or at least we go to somebody who we trust, who can help us make this decision. But we don't do this when we go to charity. Only 3% give based on performance. And then when we ask people, what's the difference between these two? Let's say, for example, the difference between Give Directly and the difference between Give Directly and the Malaria Against Malaria Foundation. People think the difference is like between 1.5 to 2, but actually the way that they quantify this, there's lots of work on this, is about 10 times more to 100 times more. So they've asked me to show you this slide, but then I actually needed to go to the reports to see what they're talking about. So where is this information coming from? So this is from a large-scale survey of a lot of households in the US, asking them of the donations overall, where are the donations coming from? And this is something that we don't consider very much. Who is giving the most charities in the world? And what you can see over here is that the individual donations actually are the bulk of the donations happening, at least in 2008 in the US. So if you think, we're not making a difference, or the big charities are going to tackle this, it's not necessarily the case. However, there is something to be said about individual wealthiest of us all are the most who do the individual contributions, but there's definitely even people who are under 80K who are also contributing. So this puts us in that category. So not, it's a sizable proportion of the charities in there. This is where I saw from the Hope Consulting how people do the research. So how many of them did the research in 2009? So 65% never do this. How long do they spend on this? I thought this was actually really interesting. Even if you do some research, ever do research is a yes or no, but let's say that you do research, how long do you spend on this? When you look at this, so some people are like, less than 15 minutes. They did do research, but less than 15 minutes. What can you do in 15 minutes in order to know anything about charities, all these complex problems? Very, very difficult. Only 10%, do more than six hours. Some people spend their whole time, in academia, in EA organizations, contemplating this sort of thing. And then the question, do we want to use their information? Can we use their information? How to best give that information to them? And then how do they make their decisions? How many use facts and figures, and how many people use stories or quotes and testimonials? There's all sorts of biases that come into that. How to look for information. I thought this was also very interesting in that report. The Hope Consulting, people go and just like the organization's website, which I thought is really interesting. I don't think the organization is a good source of information for whether the organization is doing well, but we do this. We do this with, let's say, I think we mentioned in the class Red Cross, and so we want to go. So we just go, what did you do? Tell me what you did. But less so outside sources. Sometimes we talk to employees, friend or family. So internet search, but we don't have these outside advisor or, let's say, more independent sources of information. This is like a breakout of different segments. I don't know if you saw this in your readings, but this is one of the very few in judgment decision-making papers that came out from this team. So Spencer, I think some of you listened to perhaps the Clearly Thinking or Clearer Thinking podcast, which Spencer does, and I think just blows my mind how the clarity and eloquence of the discussions over there, very high level kind of, I think one of the highest level podcasts that I've listened to. Lucius does a bunch of stuff. He actually has an organization, an EA organization in Germany. So he combines academia and real effective work in Germany. And then he is showing with real evidence, as you can see over here, that people actually vastly underestimate differences in charities. So the one slide that they gave me pointed to this paper, which is really nice, because now it only came out in 2020. Until 2020, we didn't know this. There's like scientific evidence, but now some of us in social psychology, judgment decision-making, actually doing research on this. So whenever people tell you people underestimate, can you show me what that is? And now we can, because there is this paper that does a bunch of studies. So they looked at, let's say, regular people, the average people, M-Turk sample. I do a lot of things on Amazon Mechanical Turk. It's an online labor market of Americans online. Tipping points of intervention. Then they ask Oxford students who go through some EA training, so they know a little bit about science and effectiveness, and they estimated this to be higher. And then they talk to actually effective altruists that put this on a much higher. And then they talk to experts, which like went, all the way up. So it's really interesting to see the comparisons between all of those in how people compare charities. So you can actually go and look at their materials on how they ask people to evaluate charities and how they did this kind of stuff. One of the follow-ups that I think that should be worked on to, if you want to do more research on this, you're thinking maybe doing a thesis at some point or joining some of these EA organizations, is that you can take their paradigm about charity A, charity B, a bit like the giving game did between Give Directly and Against Malaria Foundations, and then increasing complexity. So what do people do when you increase complexity and ask them to compare long-term to AI, to clean air, to vitamin A supplements? There's also a lot of evidence in psychology, increasing evidence in psychology about how to donate effectively. So we want to go to some high-level meta-analysis, meta-review. So this is a meta-analysis of charitable donations. And you can see all the interventions about what works in order to increase charitable donations. How do we get people to donate more? And it's interesting, the kind of things that seem to work, the kind of intervention that seem to work. So they found 21 systematic reviews with more than 2 million participants. And then most of the interventions have a very small effect size. Many of them don't work at all. So you can see what appeals to people and what doesn't appeal to people. Sometimes they do an intervention and it goes into the other direction, so the opposite of the direction that they wanted things to go. But then if you see what kind of things change people's donation, has a lot to do with biases. So for example, here we're talking about asking for strange amounts of money. And then during the phase, we do some interventions in judgment decision-making in the other course. So those taking judgment decision-making with me have seen some of these interventions. So worthwhile to go and see when we have a meta-analysis. So seeing a few meta-analysis summarized, to go in there and see what the results are and what is the best intervention in order to get people to donate more. So this is the kind of exercises that we're doing in the other course in judgment and decision making, but I thought it's worthwhile for you to know what kind of things affect others. Pro-social, sometimes to some extent matching schemes, but complicated. And then of looking at reputation, looking at cost and benefit, looking at efficacy, and seeing if this really shifts people's perspective on this. So rather than this being, this is how we should do things, this is what people usually rely on in order to make decisions, and then we can think about how to overcome these. Or if you work for a charity and your only goal is to increase how many people donate to your charity or the amounts that they donate, then you can go on one of these and see how you want to use that. There's a whole guide of that they're working on. I don't know exactly what to do with all these diagrams, but this is one of the summaries that gives you step by step on why people do proactive, pro-social giving. So starting from values to goals to plans to intentions and then finally to well-doing. So I think it's like a nice model for us to think about, because sometimes we get lost in the details. There's 100 researchers looking at values. I did research on values and how this relates to pro-social behavior. And then there's some people who do goals, 100 people doing goals. They don't talk to the values people. It's like completely different domain. So we're all working in our little silos, in our bubbles. And then finally, somebody comes along and creates these diagrams. How to translate these academic diagrams to things that are happening in the field, how to help practitioners, how to help people make decisions. This is a little bit of what I'm hoping the EA community and we can do in order to bridge the psychology literature to actual real life implications. But it's just supposed to kind of give you a sense of the different mechanism, emotional mechanism, social psychological mechanism, moral mechanism, and then personal factors leading to well-doing. We had a little bit of a discussion. I think with both groups, we talked about equations. Do we want to have equations? So first, we identify factors. So you've talked a little bit about these factors. You talked about, how do we know? Who is this helping? What is the scale? What is the motivation? Do we have transparency? After we map this, the next stage would be, how much is each of these lines? What is leading? What are the relationships between this one and this one, this one and this one? So this is a little bit what meta-analyses are supposed to do, to take an entire literature and try to quantify this together in order to show some of the relationships. I think it's coming up. Another discussion, I can't remember which team, was about overhead. So people definitely focus a lot on overhead. This was actually in the slides that they gave me from Give Directly. So one of the reasons why people focus on overhead is because before EA, before effective altruism, the way that people chose charities was tools like Charity Navigator, and they emphasize what is the overhead. So when they imagine overhead, they're thinking, oh, the people who manage the charities just have massages all day from my kind of money. But this is kind of like a myth that the efficiency and effectiveness are the same. And then we have a bunch of psychological experiments that we ran in order to see what happens when we give people information both about efficiency and about effectiveness. Are they able to overcome the overhead emphasis? So this is one of the things that I was able to find. So it's interesting that behind these slides, there's a lot of literature from the social psychology, judgment, decision-making literature. This was actually published in Science, so big study. And one of the nice things about this study is that there was a very large-scale replication of this study, and the replication was successful. So it does seem very much like people focus on the overhead. And what they did over here in the Science, so they had both a lab experiment and they had a field experiment with 40,000 potential donors. So that's a really nice thing when you're looking for evidence. It's nice that somebody did something in a lab, but does this work in the field? Does this scale to the field? Has is this a large sample? 40,000 people in the field actually has a lot more credibility to me than that. And is there an independent replication of that? And here a bunch of groups together, you see all these authors over here did a replication, an independent replication of this with yet another sample. What they did over there is that they said they gave people information in different groups about the overhead telling them that you're not going to pay for the overhead because the overhead has been paid for somebody else, or there's no overhead. So they've manipulated whether there is overhead and whether the money that you're going to donate is going to go to that overhead or not. So if the overhead has been completely, covered by somebody rich, seems like people donate a lot more, like by scale, a lot more winning if the overhead is completely covered by somebody else. So it seems like people really emphasize overhead. So at the very least, understanding how people make these decisions, if you know that people care about overhead and you want them to focus on something else, just tell them that the money that they're donating will not go to the overhead. Get somebody else, like the government or big charities, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, who understand that they can overcome these biases because you can give them. Bill Gates especially really likes all these statistics. When you give charity, you cover the overhead. Everybody else will cover all the other things. So you can play around with what is the efficiency and what is the effectiveness. So finally, when we have very complex models, when we have, where was this? We have all this. You want to see, so actually at the end, what are the links over here? How can we see what's going on? Then we have these meta-analyses that actually give us these sort of things. So one factor leading to two factors, leading to a final factor, and then going to general helping. So we try to do studies that will look at the whole model and test this whole thing together, looking at the impact on each one of those things, both on intent and on behavior. So I think we're going to stop here for now. I just need one final step from you as we complete this. Now that we have finished the whole thing, I just need you to go back on the Mentimeter and officially give me your vote based on everything that you've heard after the contemplation by two teams. You don't have to follow what the team said, just based on your own feeling of which one you would like to donate to. And then together as a class, I will give this back to Luke, and this is how we're going to allocate our $10 per student. Yeah, we'll get a certificate and a demonstration that he's actually donated that money in our name. Good, so you have some work to do by the end of the week. I think the most important to me is the midterm evaluations. So give each other feedback so you can learn from one another. Give us feedback, give me feedback, so I'll know what to do. Tell me how you're doing in this course, and if there's something I can do to make your journey more meaningful or more enjoyable, then please, I will try my best. So looking forward to your feedback. I'll see you next week. Thank you.